into the video. It's Saturday, July 10th, and we have a split slate today over on DraftKings. Both slates are looking pretty good too, so I decided to break down both today. We have an early slate starting around 4 p.m. Eastern, and the late main slate tonight starts at the usual 7 p.m. Eastern time. Both are on the same size, around 6 to 7 games, so should be good to break down both. I'm doing it individually today, and this should be a pretty good weekend for sports, especially starting today, because we have the two slates for baseball today. We have the Conor McGregor fight tonight, which I'm not even a big fan of UFC, but I'm looking forward to that card. I'll definitely be watching it. I'm sure a lot of you people will be betting on it or playing DraftKings for it, just hanging out with friends and watching it. Should be a pretty good night. Then you have the NBA Finals tomorrow. We have the NASCAR race, which you guys know I love NASCAR. I do live streams for that, so should be a pretty action-packed weekend. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure you guys are as well. But just for right now, we are talking baseball. And if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you want access to some extra content, you can check out the Patreon down below to tell you everything you get access to. But there's lots of good stuff over there. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm sure most of you guys know what it is by now, but if you don't already, it's daily fantasy sports simplified. And it's just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, there's no 150 max contest, no salary cap restrictions, nothing like that. No BS, just you versus the projections and the props. You can pick up 2 to 5 players and win up to 10 extra money just looking at some props like things over, half a hit or over 1.5 runs and RBIs and things like that, or fantasy points scored. So check it out if you haven't already. And they are hooking us up with a promo code where you can get a free money bonus up to $100 instant deposit match. So if you deposit $100, you get $200 total, and you can just use that to your advantage. It's house money, so why not check it out? Just use code CPEN when you do that. You can find that in the link down below. But I think that's pretty much it for the plugs for the most part. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as per usual, we'll start with the pitchers and move on to the bats. And we are starting in the early slate. We'll be moving on to the late slate in the later portion of this video. But up top, we have Lucas Giolito, $10,300, the most expensive pitcher on this early slate. And to be honest, I'm having a tough time rostering these super expensive pitchers ever since they weren't able to use sticky stuff, because we're kind of losing some high-end upside besides guys like Jacob DeGrom and a couple of other pitchers. But Lucas Giolito definitely hasn't been as good as he was earlier in the season. Like, his overall numbers are still pretty darn good, and it is a softer matchup versus Baltimore. I realize it's on the road and in Camden Yards, which is definitely not a good place to use pitchers. It's one of the better hitter-friendly parks in the entire league, but 4.2 implied team total against him, pretty heavy favorite, 7K prop. If he doesn't get blown up, which I don't think he's going to get blown up here versus Baltimore, he should be able to pick up the win. The 4-point bonus will give him a little bit of a cushion because the White Sox are definitely one of the best stacks on the slate here versus Eshelman. But like I said, his numbers on the season are fine. Like the surface numbers of 4.2 ERA looks terrible, but a 3.65 exit, 3.6 SIERA, about a 29% K rate, and early walking a ton of guys is not that bad at all. I just hate that he's over $10,000. I feel like he could be a little bit cheaper, but looking at the other pitchers on this slate and then the other slate, I think it makes sense of where he's priced just relative to the other pitchers. But the one problem that he's had this year is that he's giving up plenty of power, over a 200 ISO this season, which is more than any other pitcher we're going to talk about here. That's more than Caprellian, that's more than Rogers, that's more than Max Fried. So definitely don't like the power numbers, and over 1.5 homers per 9. And he's had his fair share of pretty mediocre games this season. Now, he's had some pretty strong ones as well. But the Orioles this season versus righties, they've been pretty stingy versus lefties, actually. But versus righties, only an 84 WRC+, 293 WOBA, 154 ISO, about a 25% K rate. Not walking a ton either. So if you had the money for a top-end pitcher, Lucas Giolito projection-wise is going to look good, but I don't think he's an absolute must-play on this slate, but he's definitely a fine option because there's not that many great pitching options on the early slate. And then James Caprellian here, $9,200, so it's a fine matchup versus Texas, kind of a similar implied team total against him. The one concern for him is that he has been absolute trash versus lefties, and Joey Gallo has been very, very good for a month or so now. Like, ever since pitchers had to stop using the sticky stuff, Joey Gallo's definitely stepped it up a notch. And if you're looking at his splits, like versus righties, Caprellian's been very good. 32 inning sample size, get below a 2 ERA, 3.4 xFIP, 33% K rate, 5% walk rate, not allowing any power whatsoever, less than a homer per 9. But versus lefties, he's kind of getting rocked a bit. About 2 homers per 9, a 46.5% hard contact rate, 250 ISO, strikeout rate's below 20%, double-digit walk rate, a 5.2 xFIP, which that scares me because there is some lefties in the lineup. Now, I'm still not really scared of Texas, and he's been fine versus them this season. I think he's had around 15, 18 points in his 2 games versus them, so I'm not that scared. I mean, the guy's been a fine pitcher this season. He's got a respectable 27% K rate, and I mean, overall, his ERA looks really, really good at 2.8, but the xFIP's about 2 runs higher at 4.2, about 1.5 runs higher, and the SIERA is just below 4, so I would say there's some regression coming, but I'm not really sure that's going to happen here versus Texas. So if you can't get all the way up to Giolito, I think Kapralian is still a fine option, even though he seems a bit expensive at $9,200. Then we have Trevor Rogers here, $8,600. And while I realize it is a tougher matchup versus Atlanta, I'd still say he's probably my favorite pitcher on this slate relative to his price point. Like, I think he should probably be more expensive than Kapralian, and probably pretty darn close to Giolito. So I think we're getting a massive discount here, probably because of the scary matchup versus Atlanta. But they haven't exactly been the best team in the world versus lefties this season. If we're just looking at their splits, I mean, yeah, they have some power, 194 ISO, but 99 WRC plus, which is solid, but a 25% K rate. I mean, they've been better versus righties this season. I mean, they're walking a ton versus righties and overall some better numbers, but versus lefties, they've been just a little bit worse and they can strike out a little bit. And Trevor Rogers is just a good pitcher. Like, I'm not trying to pick on Atlanta here, but we do have limited options. And it's a pitcher-friendly park in Atlanta, and his numbers on the season, he's sporting a 2.2 ERA, which is excellent, 3.3 xFIP, 3.4 SIERA, 30.3% K rate, not really giving up any power whatsoever with less than an 80 ISO. So when you factor in the talent and his price tag, he definitely looks like one of the top options, if not the top option, point per dollar wise on this slate. So definitely a big fan of Trevor Rogers. Then Max Fried, $8,500. He can be a bit of a shaky pitcher on the opposite side of this game. Low implied team total here. He is a slight favorite with the team total being 3.49 compared to 3.51 for Trevor Rogers, but it's basically a pick 'em here. But definitely love the part he is pitching in. Now his numbers on the season have been very average. 4.6 ERA is pretty ugly, but the xFIP and SIERA about 0.6 lower, just right around 4 here. 23% K rate, doesn't really allow a ton of power, gets a good deal of ground balls. And so far this season, Miami has not been that great versus lefties. They kind of got shut down by Drew Smyly a few starts ago, and on the season, it's been pretty ugly. 87 WRC plus, 27.7% K rate, 145 team ISO. So I realize he might be a bit expensive. I wish Max Fried was in the 7K range, and he's only $100 less than Trevor Rogers. So if you had to pick between the two, yes, the matchup is softer for Max Fried, but I can definitely trust the arm of Trevor Rogers more than I can Max Fried. But if we don't play these two together, I wouldn't mind that. This should be a pretty low-scoring game for the most part, at least when they're in the game. Obviously, anything can happen to the bullpens, but I don't think anything's going to collapse here, and like I said, it's a pitcher-friendly park. So these guys are definitely looking very good for me. Plus, if you go kind of double mid-range at pitcher today, you can definitely load up on those bats, and there's lots of good bats on this slate. So that could definitely be a viable strategy, but I'm definitely a really big fan of Trevor Rogers on that early slate. And with that being said, I think we can move on to the hitters for the early slate, and we have lots of good ones to talk about, lots of good offenses. And anyway, we'll start with the catcher position, and up top we have JT Ramuto, $4,100, and his price is slowly creeping up. He was around $3,200 a few games ago. Now he's above 4K, which is where he should be. He should honestly be closer to, I would say, like $4,500. Maybe he shouldn't be quite $5,000, but I think you could make a case for that. Sometimes when I see some other catchers priced that high, so I guess Ramuto could be, but I love this game once again. Last night you wanted all the Sox, whether it was the White Sox or the Red Sox, but this is a game that I definitely think can pop off once again. It popped off yesterday. I want to say it scored around 15 runs. Last I saw it was 10-5, I want to say, but it should be another high-scoring one. Two very below-average pitchers at best on the mounds for both teams here. We have Martin Perez, a lefty who's not very good. Then on the opposite side of this game, we have another lefty in Matt Moore, who is also not very good. Both have implied team totals of 5 here. It's a very hitter-friendly park in Boston, so you can sign me up for both sides of this game. You're going to see lots of Phillies and Red Sox bats here, but they're definitely the two, well, I wouldn't say they're the two top options because the White Sox are there, but two of the best options on the slate. And the Phillies are not that expensive. JT Ramuto, one of the better hitting catchers in baseball, still seems a little bit too cheap for me, so definitely think he's a fine play. Zach Collins, $3,200, just a cheaper lefty here versus Eshelman, which you guys are going to see lots of White Sox, Phillies bats, and Red Sox bats in this video because those are definitely the top offenses here. They all grade out pretty well versus the pretty below average pitchers that they are facing. White Sox have a 5.8 implied team total here, and Zach Collins has a little bit of pop versus righties, so if he's in the lineup, just give me all the White Sox here. Then Kevin Plawecki, $2,000. If he's in the lineup here over Christian Vasquez, he's absolutely free at $2,000. So if you happen to be spending up for a guy like Lucas Giolito, Plawecki is one of those guys that can make that fit. And the Red Sox have a team total of right around 6 dates at 5.8 as of right now. I could see that rising throughout the day. Phillies bullpen's not that great. Matt Moore is obviously not very good. And they have a lot of guys that do grade out pretty well versus left-handed pitching. First base, we have Matt Olson, $5,700. I think I only have him and Elvis Andrus as the only Oakland A's here, but I think they make for a decent contrarian stack because everyone's going to be on Boston, everyone's going to be playing Philly, everyone's going to like the White Sox. So I think the Oakland bats could get a bit overlooked here, but they get a good matchup versus Folty. He's a guy that will allow power and some hard contact, and we know Olson is absolutely crushing right-handed pitching this season, so don't hate him if you're trying to get contrarian off the chalk here. Jose Abreu, $5,600 for obvious reasons, like all the Chicago White Sox here versus Eshelman, not a very good pitcher. They're on the road in Camden Yards, so you have the guaranteed Anthony bats, and one of the best places to hit, especially in the summer. So love all the White Sox here, and Gavin Sheets for the same reasons I just talked about with Jose Abreu. We get the lefty on righty matchup here, and he went deep last night. It's a smaller sample size for him, but he has been playing some pretty decent baseball. I know he hits lower in the order, but at least he's a little bit cheaper, and you get cheap exposure to the Sox by doing that. Then dropping down to second base, we have Kike Hernandez, $4,800, another leadoff donger yesterday, and had overall a pretty solid game, and I could see that happening once again here. He's getting a little bit expensive. Wish he was still in the 3K range where he was a pretty much auto play at that price point. Now at nearly $5,000. You got to think about it a bit, but always like him versus lefties. Matt Moore kind of sucks, and love all the Red Sox here. Team total of 6, highest on the slate, although the White Sox are giving them a run for their money, but you can sign me up for all the Red Sox here, especially their leadoff guy versus a lefty. Leury Garcia, $300. He's been playing pretty well the past couple of weeks now. I know his numbers in the season aren't that great, but switch hitter here, left and righty matchup versus Eshelman. I like all the White Sox. Gene Segura, $3,500. Probably your cash game second baseman. I'd like to get the Kike, but he's also $1,300 more expensive, and Segura's in a fine spot here. Like, the guy's a good batting average guy, obviously not a ton of power, but he had a triple yesterday. He's batting .330 on the season, 131 WRC+, and those numbers are really good versus left-handed pitching. Like, if you just want to look at the specific splits here. So he's batting .330 overall versus lefties, .310 batting average, .359 WOBA, but 127 WRC+, only 11% K rate. So, yeah, I'm definitely like Segura in cash games, assuming he's in the lineup. Unless he happens to be out of the lineup, I'd say this is where you're going to go in cash games, save some money. Then dropping at third base, we got the two boppers here, and depending on whatever team you're stacking. If you're stacking the Red Sox, don't care about the lefty-on-lefty matchup. He'll see a righty at some point. Plus, he could still hit a donger off the lefty, but I'd prefer if it was a righty, but he'll see one at some point. But you got Devers here, who's been crushing it this season. He had a good game last night, went deep. Then Moncada, if you're just stacking the White, it just depends on who you're stacking. I mean, stacking Red Sox, you know to go with. If you're stacking White Sox, you got Yohan Moncada, guy that can get on base quite a bit. Hasn't really shown a ton of power this season, but again, it's all about who you're stacking. Then Alec Bohm, $3,300, just a really cheap righty here versus Martin Perez. I know his numbers on the season have been like very, very bad, like absolutely terrible, but if you're just looking for some cheap righty pop here versus Martin Perez, he could be your guy, although he's going to hit the very bottom of the lineup, which is never appealing, so probably where you'd go in like tournaments if you're just trying to stack. You could also do like a wraparound stack here. If you're stacking the 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, 4 for the Phillies, you could throw in Alec Bohm there and kind of make it a wraparound there. Then dropping on shortstop, you have Tim Anderson. If you're stacking the White Sox, hasn't been a big power threat this season, but he had over 20 fantasy points last night. Always hits for a high batting average. Xander Bogaerts, $5,600. It's similar to Moncada and Devers. It just depends on what team you're stacking here. Both guys are absolutely elite options. Then Elvis Andrus, if you need to save some money, $3,500. I know his numbers kind of suck in the season. I'd prefer if it was versus a lefty, but I think the Oakland A's make for a decent contrarian stack here because I don't think a lot of people are going to play them due to all the chalky bats we have with the White Sox, Red Sox, and the Phillies, but Oakland A's are in a pretty good spot. Definitely not concerned about going up against Mike Folty. And then dropping out of the outfield here, I got a few options. Usually I have a lot more, but I'm trying to keep this video a little bit shorter since we have 2 slates to break down. But Gina Martinez, $5,300. I want to say, last time I looked, he had the most points of any bat on the entire slate. Not sure if that held up due to the late games, but he went deep last night. Would not be surprised if he does that once again versus lefty Matt Moore. He's been crushing it this season. Alex Verdugo, $4,300. Anytime Boston's in a good spot, Verdugo is always pretty much underpriced for the most part. For a guy that hits for a decent average, has a little bit of pop in his bat. Yes, I'd prefer if he was facing a righty, but he can hit lefties just fine, and he's cheap, and he'll see a righty at some point. Plus, I just like all the Red Sox here, so he's fine in stacks. Brian Goodwin, $4,100. I hate to keep making it sound similar, but it just depends on who you're stacking here. Like, if you have all the Red Sox, you play Verdugo. If you have all the White Sox, you play Brian Goodwin, their cleanup guy. And he's actually been pretty decent this year. It's a smaller sample size. He had a good game last night, but on the season, 243 ISO. The batting average hasn't exactly been that great, but he's shown some decent power this season. And at $4,100, batting cleanup versus Eshelman, definitely like the upside there. Hunter Renfroe, $4,000. Obviously not the greatest bat out there, but the one thing he does pretty well is hit lefties, and he does hit lefties for a decent amount of power. Like, so far this season, he's got some really good numbers versus them. 100 plate appearance sample size, batting .315. 418 WOBA, 250 ISO, 163 WRC+, about striking out as much as he walks, which is fine, and can get some hard contact versus them, 40% hard contact rates. I definitely like the home run upside here for Hunter Renfroe. Then you have Andrew McCutchen, $3,300 facing the lefty, and he's had some really good numbers versus lefties this season, kind of similar to what Hunter Renfroe's been doing. About a 300 batting average. The WOBA's pretty much the exact same here. 280 ISO, 167 WRC plus, kind of like an identical look from Hunter Renfroe here. So both guys are absolutely fine options, but I love that price point on Andrew McCutchen. Could definitely see him being very popular in cash games. And if Odubel Herrera is leading off, you could look at him as well. I think he's only $3,100, but that's going to be pretty much it for the early slate. So we'll move right over to the main slate pitchers now. And I'm going to be honest, the early slate looks a lot better. There's some good pitching options. There's some good bats. On this one, the bats are pretty terrible. Like, yeah, we have some fine pitching options here. Walker Buehler, Freddie Peralta. I didn't even list Garrett Cole because he's looked pretty bad without the sticky stuff so far. But, I mean, the bats are pretty bad. But you'll see what I'm talking about when we get there. But we'll start up top here with Walker Buehler, $9,600. Don't think this is the greatest strikeout upside matchup in the world versus Arizona. Like, Walker Buehler's not a big strikeout guy anyway. Like, yeah, he's got a fine 25.5% K rate. I wish it was more for a guy that's close to $10,000. Like, the guy that's $400 cheaper than him, while it might be a worse matchup versus Cincinnati and hitter-friendly park in Milwaukee, I mean, he's sitting at 35%, so I like the upside there a lot more. I feel like I'd rather play Freddie Peralta, but from a run prevention standpoint, I think Walker Buehler is in a pretty good spot here. Arizona is obviously not going to pose too much of an offensive threat here. Striking out around 24.5% of the time, walking around 8.8% of the time, which is kind of right on par with all these other teams, but only a 131 team ISO, 290 WOBA, 80 WRC plus. Like, I don't think he's going to come out here strike out 10 plus, but I'd be shocked if he gave up more than like 2 or 3 runs here. Should be able to work decently deep into the game, pick up the win, do like the Dodger stack, probably one of the best stacks in the entire slate. No team total yet, but if I had to guess, probably upper 2s, low 3s for Walker Buehler. Then Freddie Peralta, $9,200. Not the greatest matchup in the world versus Cincinnati. It's definitely a hitters-friendly park in Milwaukee, but I'm just pretty much chasing the strikeout rate here for Freddie Peralta. I love that strikeout upside. That's the thing we like the most in DFS for baseball, so you can sign me up all day for that 35.5% carry, even though he will walk some guys, but he can limit the power, and on the season, he's only given up a 27.9% hard contact rate with less than 1 homer per 9. In the matchup versus Cincinnati, as a righty, they got some guys that can hit right-handed pitching pretty well. Like, this is no cakewalk matchup here for Freddie Peralta. They're only striking out 22% of the time, 178 team ISO, 335 OBP, which is on a par with their WOBA, and a 108 WRC plus. So we're going to be a little bit careful here with Freddie Peralta, but I still think the strikeouts can be there. Lefties have definitely fared a lot better versus Cincinnati, but when you got a 35.5% K rate, I mean, you can sign me up for that all day. I'll definitely bite on that. Only a 3.3 implied team total against him. Pretty heavy favorite and an 8K prop as well, and his numbers have been overall. I only kind of talked about the strikeout rate, but the acceptance here numbers look pretty good too. And then Patrick Sandoval, $8,400. This is mainly just being a lefty versus Seattle because they have been absolutely brutal versus left-handed pitching this season. I mean, they've been pretty bad versus righties too, but versus lefties, it's been really bad. Over a 27% K rate, 289 OBP and 89 WRC plus. And Sandoval has shown some strikeout upside this season. I believe he's sitting at around what 26% this season. We'll walk some guys, we'll give some power, but I'm not really scared about any of the power threats for Seattle. They don't really have any of those, and he's getting a lot of ground balls, over 50% ground ball rate, 29% hard contact rate allowed. The only thing that's worrisome here is the power, like we just mentioned, but you don't really have to worry about that too much against Seattle, so I think there is some strikeout upside here. Then Joe Musgrove, $7,700. I could see him being very chalky as our SP2, even though he's kind of sucked the past 2 games, kind of got blown up versus Washington, and then Cincinnati got beat up early on, but only a 3.2 implied team total here, pretty heavy favorite, and if you can just kind of excuse the last couple of games, he's facing Colorado on the road, and we know anytime Colorado's on the road, you can always roster the pitcher against him. Heck, I mean, I've even rostered pitchers in cores against them this season because that offense is pretty brutal, but his numbers are good this year. Like, yeah, I know he's had a couple of stinky games, but the ERA is still below 3, xFIP's at 3.3, Sierras are kind of right on par with that, close to a 30% K rate, doesn't really give up a ton of power, 147 ISO, 31% hard contact rate, around a homer per 9, and we know the Rockies suck away from cores, so it's $7,700. I mean, we've been playing him close to $9,000 this season in some spots, so $7,700. I definitely like buying a little bit low on Joe Musgrove. And we have an absolute punt option here in Kim. Now, I'm probably not going to get there in cash games unless I'm absolutely loading up on bats. So if I'm going to go Musgrove and Kim, yeah, you're going to have pretty much any kind of salary you want to do to load up on any single bat that you want. So he's purely just a pump play here, probably better suited for tournaments. But the weather, it looks like it's going to be in favor for the pitching here in Chicago. Looks like the wind's going to be blowing in around 10 to 12 miles per hour, which is a boost for the pitching. And yeah, Kim's numbers are really bad this season, and the matchup as a lefty versus the Cubs doesn't look exactly that great. I mean, they got a 171 team ISO, 104 WRC plus, 324 WOBA. The bright spot is they're striking out at 26% clip, but Kim's not a big strikeout guy. He's only got like around an 18% K rate this season, but he limits the power. Only a 1 and 2 ISO given up. A lean to the ground ball is close to 50%, only a 30% hard contact rate, and less than a homer per 9. So I don't think he's going to get blown up here. Only 3.5 implied team total. I don't think he'll pick up the win or anything, but at $5,700, if he can get you like 5+ innings of 1 or 2 or 3 run ball with a handful of strikeouts, that's not bad at $5,700 because I don't think he's going to get absolutely blown up. So if you're looking for a punt option to fit in a bunch of expensive bats, Kim would be your guy. That's kind of it for the pitching for the most part. Nothing super exciting there, but a couple of guys I think might be just a bit underpriced. They'll move on to the main slate bats, which, like I was saying, are pretty brutal for the most part. I'm going to have a hard time making a case for any of these guys, but we'll start up top with the catcher position. We have Omar Narvaez, $4,500, and as of right now, they currently have the highest implied team total in the slate. Now, I think when it's all said and done, when the Dodgers line comes out, they'll probably end up having the highest one. I'd say closer to 5 against Caleb Smith, who's not the worst pitcher out there, but still versus the Dodgers offense, you'd have to probably think it'd be close to 5 here, but the Milwaukee Brewers are actually in a pretty decent spot versus Gutierrez here. He's not that great of a pitcher, and on the season, Narvaez has been pretty good versus right-handed pitching. Like overall, he's batting .303 with a 172 ISO, but if you look specifically to righties, he's batting .324, 176 ISO, OBP above 400, only a 15% K rate. So I think he's probably the best catcher to use today. If you got the money for him, if you're spending down for a pitcher, you could certainly fit him in. He should also be batting cleanup for the Brewers, which is obviously a prime spot for a catcher, hitter-friendly park in Milwaukee. I think he's a fine option here. Plus, Cincinnati bullpen, if they can get the Gutierrez early, it's not very good. They have some guys that can get some strikeouts, but overall, it's not that great of a bullpen. Dropping down to Will Smith here, $4,200, not overly expensive, and he's in a pretty good spot here versus Caleb Smith, and he's shown plenty of power this season for a catcher, above a 200 ISO, 260 batting average. Obviously, they're not the most exciting numbers in the world, but for a catcher that's pretty darn good, usually hits in the middle of the order. Should have plenty of RB opportunity here, and I think the Dodgers are probably going to end up being the top stack on the slate tonight for the late main slate. And then after that, there was a lot of terrible options. We had a couple of Seattle guys. I landed on Tom Murphy here just because of the spot in the order, because most of the catchers here are going to be hitting at the very bottom. So if you can get a guy that hits in the middle at below $3,000, I know it's not the greatest matchup versus Sandoval. I actually talked about Sandoval a little bit. Probably more so as a tournament option, but he will give up a little bit of power, and Tom Murphy's got a little bit of pop versus lefties, so probably either going to be strikeout or bust here, but for $2,100, you really can't beat the price point. Dropping out of first base, we have a couple of Angels here. Shohei Ohtani, $6,000. He went deep last night, and he's pretty much just the best player in baseball. I realize the Angels only have a team total of 4.3 here. Not really an offense that I'm going to get super excited about, but with the slate that we have in the main slate tonight, it looks like we're going to have to at least have some interest in the Angels here, no matter how bad that lineup is. But Ohtani, I mean, there's nothing bad to say here. He's got over a 410 ISO this season, exactly at 416, 177 WRC plus, 700 slugging, 431 WOBA. He crushes lefties, he crushes righties. If you can fit him in, he's definitely the top play on the slate tonight versus Chris Flexen, a low strikeout pitcher. Jared Walsh, $5,300. Some really good numbers versus right-handed pitching this season. Now, comparing it right to Ohtani makes it look a little bit worse here. Like, yeah, his numbers aren't going to be as dark shades of green as Ohtani, but a 273 ISO, 139 WRC plus, 280 batting average, and a 374 WOBA are still absolutely elite numbers here. So don't scoff at it. I mean, you can still play Ohtani in the outfield, play Jared Goff. Jared Goff's not football season. Jared Walsh at first base to make that work. If you want to do like a little mini Angel stack for the most part, I wouldn't hate that idea versus Chris Flexen. And then Albert Pujols, if you want a cheap option here, assuming he's in the lineup here versus a lefty, should have a decent spot in the order. Obviously, there's some pinch hit risk, but he's below 3K, and he has done one thing well this season. Everything else he's been pretty bad at, but versus lefties, he's actually had some good numbers. 85 plate appearance sample size, but batting .313, 414 WOBA, 325 ISO, 638 slugging, and only an 11% K rate. So I know it feels kind of gross, but if you are stacking Dodgers, maybe you can get a couple good at-bats from Pujols versus a lefty. And then dropping out second base, we have Max Muncy. You could also play him at first, but $5,500, very expensive. Not really concerned about a lefty-on-lefty matchup. He'll see a righty at some point, but even then, he's still been very good versus lefties this season, so it's not like I really care too much. 84 plate appearance sample size, but batting .277, 435 WOBA, over a 300 ISO, 440 OBP. Like, his numbers are really good versus lefties, and he's actually walking more than he is striking out, and he's only striking out 15% of the time with a 20% walk rate. So don't care at all about a lefty-on-lefty matchup. He should be just fine if you're full stack in Dodgers. It's Peterson. He was kind of hot for a bit of a stretch, $3,700. again, there's no really that many great options. Like normally, I probably wouldn't talk about Jace Peterson here at $3,700 versus Gutierrez, but the Brewers looked solid versus him. Not the greatest pitcher out there, and Peterson's shown some decent pop this season. Like the batting average is pretty low. It's a smaller sample size compared to most batters, but 183 ISO. And if we look specifically versus right-handed pitching, I mean, Jace Peterson's not really been terrible. Close to a 200 ISO, striking out 20% of the time, but got a walk rate around 17%, 45% fly ball rate. I mean, he's not a great hitter, but we kind of have to take what we can get here from DraftKings today. And then David Fletcher, $2,800. I could kind of see him being chalky. I think he homered last night, which is not something he will do often. Like he hits for contact. ISO overall is below 60, which is not very good, and their team total is not that high. But at $2,800 leading off, I don't hate a little mini angel stack tonight. I know it's not going to look pretty, but I don't hate it. Then dropping a third base, Justin Turner, $5,200, just ready on lefty power here versus Caleb Smith for a stack that I think looks pretty good tonight. Luis Urias, $4,500, potentially leading off here for the Brewers, who are looking like probably the second best stack on the slate. Would definitely have some interest in them versus Cincinnati. Then Rengifo, $2,000 if you want to kind of stick with the Angels. He is free. He's going to hit at the bottom of the order. His numbers aren't very impressive, but if you need some cheap options here, he is available. That's probably the nicest thing I can say about Rengifo here. Then going down to shortstop, it's ugly once again. You could obviously play Tatis. I didn't put him on here because I don't love the matchup, but if you want to play Tatis, I'd have no problem with that. Obviously one of the best players in baseball. But we have Chris Taylor, just ready on the matchup here versus Smith. Willie Adames, $4,100, just kind of sticking with that Brewer stack, and he should be hitting in a decent spot in the order. Then Glabber Torres, I don't really like the Yankees here versus Zach Greinke, kind of avoiding this game overall, but I just put on here because of the price point. I didn't want to put Tatis here and have like three guys around $5,000 plus. So Torres is dirt cheap, $3,100. Not the worst hitter out there. I mean, he's obviously not that great, but hits in the middle of the order for the Yankees. Greinke's obviously not what he used to be. He's still solid somehow. I don't know how he's still like okay. Like if you're looking at his like the way he pitches, like it's so slow. You'd think he'd get murdered, but he's just a finesse pitcher and he does it well. So, but I don't hate Torres at $3,100. And then going down the outfield, we have Christian Yelich, $5,100, who I feel like has been absolutely abysmal for 2 years now. I don't know if he's still battling an injury or anything like that, but if you're stacking Brewers, Yelich is obviously going to be a key part of that lineup. Mookie Betts, $5,200. I could see him being very popular at that price point, not overly expensive, and the outfielders are absolutely trash on this slate. As you can see, I have the next three guys are going up against Garrett Cole. So the outfield does not look that promising today, so I could definitely see a lot of people going on Mookie Betts, especially if you're just stacking up the Dodgers. And then we have the onslaught of the Houston outfielders here just because of their price points. And Garrett Cole has definitely not been the same pitcher without the sticky stuff, the spin rates down, and he's been getting some runs. The strikeouts haven't really exactly been there, and Houston's a tough lineup, so I'm not really that interested in using Garrett Cole by any means. I actually would even hate using a stack against him to try to get different. I mean, it's kind of a situation where I'm avoiding. Like, I don't want to play Garrett Cole, but I don't really want to play the Astros. But I think some of these outfielders do make some sense at their price points. Kyle Tucker's got plenty of pop versus righties. Michael Brantley's just one of the best pure hitters in baseball. And Miles Straw, well, he's not that good. He's got some speed, though, but he should be hitting at the top of the order, projected anyway. And he's dirt cheap at $2,200 if you're just looking for a guy that could potentially get on base and score a run. But that is pretty much about it. The bats on this slate are not that impressive, but I mean, everyone's gonna deal with the same thing, so something's gonna be optimal today. Something will. We're just gonna have to hope that we find it. But with that being said, guys, I think that'll be it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check out the extra content over on Patreon if you feel like that's something you want to check out. You can follow me over on social media as well. Enjoy the fight tonight. Enjoy the NBA Finals tomorrow. Enjoy the race as I'll be live around 2:30 p.m. Eastern if you want to check that out. And last but not least, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks and Daily Fantasy Sports Simplified. It's just you versus the projections. You don't have to compete against sharks or anything like that. And they're hooking us up with a free money bonus up to $100 if you do use code CPEN. That's an instant deposit match, so whether you deposit $20, $50, you'll get that exact money right back. So it's free money. Check it out on the house. Use it to your advantage. But I think that's pretty much it, guys. Stop rambling. Hope you enjoyed the rest of your weekend, and I'll see you guys in the next video.